Removal of President Salva-Kiir. Mashar's rebels have now taken hold of the oil-rich town of Bentiu. And more now on our top story. The U.S. has prepared a new list of sanctions against Russia if it fails to pull its troops from the border with eastern Ukraine. Last month, it placed restrictions on influential Russian businessmen and blacklisted a bank. Our White House correspondent Patty Calhoun looks at whether the sanctions are having any impact.
The Obama administration says it has overwhelming proof that Russia is behind this, the unrest in eastern Ukraine. And they are warning if a diplomatic solution can't be worked out, they are ready to respond.
If there are not steps taken by Russia to de-escalate, we will take additional steps, including additional sanctions.
U.S. officials insist the current sanctions on people close to Russian President Vladimir Putin are having an impact.
On the market value of its stocks, of its exchange rate, it has been moving in a bad direction.
But if you use those parameters, it actually isn't. Not the markets. The MICEX index has actually increased since sanctions were imposed. The value of the ruble to the dollar has barely changed. But the Russian economic minister insists his country's economy is suffering.
We also have a high level of uncertainty in the global financial markets, serious capital flight, and a situation where investors are not ready to make investment decisions in the tense international situation we've had for the past 2 months. The economic situation is not stable.
President Barack Obama has raised the idea of targeting sanctions at entire sectors of the Russian economy, such as oil and mining. But that could also have a big impact on American companies.
The obvious one would be a company like ExxonMobil, which has significant investments in Russia and is about to sign a very comprehensive and far-reaching deal with the Russian state oil company, Rosneft. A deal that almost certainly would go down the tubes if more sort of serious sanctions were imposed.
The Obama administration will still go into the meeting making threats. What they haven't said is how big of a threat it actually is. Patty Calhoun, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's speak now to Peter Zalmayev, who's live from Venice in Italy. He's the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, which promotes democracy in post-communist societies in Eastern and Central Europe. Welcome to the program. First, how far do you think the U.S. will go with these threats?
Well, this remains to be seen, and it is a very open question. You know, the U.S. has promised further sanctions in case the talks break down, but it is unclear whether they will have much effect, as there is still no unified front between the U.S. and the European Union as to the extent of those sanctions, and also considering then Putin and company are riding so high on the wave of unprecedented popularity and resurgent patriotism and jingoism in Russia, and may be willing to swallow whichever further sanctions are put in place, at least in the short run.
Yeah, so far the sanctions imposed haven't deterred Vladimir Putin in the least, have they?
No, they haven't. They haven't, and you have to consider that the EU is a major gas customer of Russia and may not be willing to put up with gas shortages, and therefore may not be up for the really serious sanctions that would bite, including a visa ban on powerful Russian politicians and their families, or even going as far as cutting off Russia from the US dollar, the euro, and the sterling.
Now, we keep hearing about diplomacy. Do you think that's going to go anywhere ahead of those talks on Thursday? The U.S. saying it doesn't expect much. Is there even any point to hold these talks?
Well, you know, you have to keep in mind that Ukraine is going in with a weakened hand, considering that it has already offered the East pretty much all it could, including expanded regional autonomy, and it has already reinstated Russian as Ukraine's second official language. It has, however, stopped short of the idea of federalization, which is apparently what Moscow is aiming for, and which the government in Kiev considers a de facto partition of the country. So a possible Moscow script would have a civil conflict that destroys the authority of the government in Kiev, followed by a parallel government for eastern Ukraine, and that is something that no other party other than Russia in the talks tomorrow are willing to contemplate.
Now, Reuters news agency has quoted U.S. officials as saying the U.S. is prepared to offer Ukraine more non-lethal assistance. What form do you think that might take?
Well, that might take at most probably military, mill-to-mill advisory sort of role that the U.S. would play. However, Ukraine's military is so further removed from any sort of readiness to confront Russian forces that no immediate help from the West would be of much help to Ukraine.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Peter Zalmayev there in Venice.